Welcome back once again to the Indiewood Podcast, a podcast about independent film and the many hats that filmmakers wear in order to get those films made. This month we are doing a writing-only podcast, although we've talked about other stuff that's not writing-oriented. I mean, we've circled it back to writing. With me, my wonderful special guest is Julia Batavia.
Hi.
Who is a writer, a novelist, a one-time director, and a podcast writer, a narrative podcast writer. And she is a screenwriter that has done biopics. That's kind of been your bread and butter. Mm-hmm. We both went to UCLA. We're both educated in the craft of screenwriting.
Yeah.
And we both have, good experience, I think, in the craft of writing.
Had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
Good subjective, but all experience is good experience.
I would say good objective as well.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You agree with me?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think objectively, like even the stuff that we've both experienced has been kind of a bummer. I think looking back on it, there's a learning experience to learn from there.
Look, it's a privilege to be a UCLA alumni. Mm-hmm. Having said that, you don't need to go to UCLA.
You don't. Well...
What I'm saying is you need to educate yourself.
Yeah.
And there are lots of ways to do that if grad school is not an option.
That's true.
That's what I'm saying. We had it handed to us on a silver platter, which we're very, very lucky.
I would use different words, but yeah, I'd agree it's a very similar kind of,
I'm just saying that.
Because, okay, this is, I'm gonna out myself.
Okay.
I almost didn't get in. Because when I went to regular college, I was not a great student.
Okay.
So my GPA did not meet the threshold to get into UCLA.
Okay.
And
so what'd you do about that?
Well, I submitted. I wrote a screenplay. I submitted, and I wrote a really good entrance letter, and I got an interview. And my mentor, I would call him my mentor. I don't think we actually officially use that terminology. Do you ever use the terminology, this is my mentor? Or do it just happens, right?
This is my great good friend.
Yeah.
This is my guru. No, this is my guru.
Yeah, my guru, my sage.
Yeah.
Well, this is funny because we'll talk about the craft of screenwriting, and that comes into play. So yeah, my mentor, Neil Landau, who's a fantastic educator. He's now the head of screenwriting at University of Georgia.
Good for Neil.
Yeah, he's killing it. He's got many, many books about writing for TV specifically. And
I actually use Neil's 6 questions.
Really?
When I'm crafting character.
Okay.
So
I'll have to look through my notes again because that I remember that being good. But see, Neil's classes for me were always TV. And he only taught TV at UCLA.
Yeah, I took a TV class. Yeah. We were in the same TV class, Yarrow.
I remember that. Yeah, okay.
You were just on your computer all the time.
We're digressing.
Looking at lenses.
No, I wasn't.
Yes, you were.
Sometimes I was. So, yeah, I met with Neil.
Yeah.
And he was like, what's up? Why are your grades bad? And I was honest. I was really open. And I was, so passionate. And I was like, I need to be here. Mm-hmm. And he agreed.
And I think, actually, I'm glad you got vulnerable and shared your grade point average was below par, because a lot of people may think, I don't have the grades. I don't have the resume.
Yeah.
And your passion, and I think that's why we are friends as well, your passion for the art, the craft, the wanting to get better, that's what Neil saw. And ultimately, that's what's most important, regardless of whatever resume you have.
Yeah. And look, they believed in me. So my other mentor was Linda Voorhees, who's also a fantastic writer and a whirlwind. And so I didn't meet with Linda during that interview process, but she also kind of read my work and spoke with Neil about me. And yeah, they put me on probation for the first quarter, and they were like, "Do a good job, or you're out." And I did a good job, and I made it. Well, let's talk about craft.
Yeah.
Let's talk about screenwriting, because
let's talk about how to talk about your craft.
Well, I have some questions for you before we get into that, because I remember when I got into grad school, I was like, I know how to write. And then I got into grad school and I was like, wow, I don't know what a first act is. Or how to transition from act 1 to act 2. Like, that's a thing that I just didn't know existed. And so I learned all these things, and I think UCLA was a great training program, and I call it a training program because you write a screenplay every 10 weeks. You leave that program with multiple drafts.
True.
And they encourage you to write new material. They're like, don't bring your stuff in, just leave it for later. Every new workshop, bring in a new idea. And I think that really pushed a lot of creatives to develop more. And so my question to you is, craft. How do you outline?
Craft. What is it?
Yeah.
How do we do it? What does it mean?
C-R-A-F-T.
I don't know.
Like the mac and cheese?
Okay.
Yeah,
craft.
so do you outline?
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you outline?
I used to use, when I was first starting, before grad school, before... I even was like this is post NYU where we never wrote a feature-length screenplay at NYU.
Really?
Weird, right?
That is weird.
Or at least I wasn't in that class. Maybe I missed it.
Okay.
I got Sid Field's the screenwriter's workbook, and that is like a 56 note card method, like 14 act 1, 14 act 2A, 2B, act 3, and I would plot out by card 7, you have the inciting incident. By card 14, 15 is plot point 1. 30 is, I literally hit marks. What I would also do is I read screenplays that I felt were close to what I wanted to write. So I studied Capote by Dan Futterman, and I studied actually Sylvia, that Gwyneth Paltrow was in, and it escapes me who wrote it. But I looked for when those turning points hit. I counted the number of scenes it took to get to that point, and I would literally use that as a blueprint. I haven't thought about this in years, and I would just see how it all laid out. So, because I didn't want to get into that trap of overwriting or having scenes that didn't move. This was a UCLA thing or a Neil thing. Scenes either reveal character or move the story forward. And if in those note cards a scene is not doing that, it doesn't belong in there.
Yeah. That kind of brings us to that concept of kill your darlings, because you write something that's so wonderful and you look at it, you're like, oh, this is the best thing I've ever written, but it doesn't do those two things. It doesn't serve the story or the screenplay.
Yeah.
It's got to go.
It's got to go. And look, you can hold on to it. You can bring it back, keep it in its own draft of, the pasture. It's gone to pasture. But truly, that's the basis of craft, is structure.
Yeah.
For me, starting with things like theme is more, it's foggier. It's then you start writing about topics. You start writing PSAs. It's not about the foundational character development that you need to have.
I find that I start a script with a certain theme in mind, and I'm like, oh, this is about whatever. Growing up in a rough household, let's just say.
Sure.
And then I write the screenplay. I'm like, no, this is it. Just the theme then is birthed from the experience of having written on the page, and it emerges. Yeah,
it's about, for me, you keep your head down, you write the thing, you take a step back, the theme becomes apparent.
Exactly, yeah.
When you weren't trying or writing for it, because when you write for it, it becomes forced. It becomes a little, what's the word?
Trophy?
Preachy.
Preachy is good. Okay.
Preachy.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that you mentioned Sid Field, because I looked at a lot of those books.
Yeah.
Like The Hero's Journey. There's a book called Dramatica. Like, there's all these different versions of the same thing, which is like,
yeah,
the story begins, the story ends, there's a rising action, there's a fall. Like, there's so many simple ways of talking about it. But for me, the one thing that allowed my brain to click, because sometimes my brain just has a hard time. Like, I'm a little dyslexic, and my brain just doesn't understand certain things sometimes. And then what I read was Save the Cat.
Oh, sure.
And my brain was like, I get this. like it clicked so well.
Yeah.
And then coming back to outline, just because it's a little bit different for me, I use a version of Save the Cat that I've modified to my own, liking over the course of a couple of years.
Right.
And instead of 3 acts, I do 4 acts.
Huh.
Because we have Act 1, right? And then we have our transition in Act 2. So Act 2, there's a lot of that like cool, fun stuff that happens.
Fun and games.
Yeah, fun and games for people who know Save the Cat. And then when we get to the midpoint, to me, that's a shift to a different act because so much changes in the midpoint, right?
So you don't have 2A and 2B. You just have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, I used to label it as 2A, 2B, right? But to me, just it feels like a different act. It doesn't feel like Act 2 because the motivations of characters change because there's a shift in the midpoint. Like the whole essence of the film for me changes at the midpoint. It just feels like Act 3, But then that ends and we get into Act 4, which is our finale. Some people write 5 acts,
True. Lots more television, really.
Yeah. But for me, just 4 acts makes sense for my weird brain.
I think it's whatever works, to be honest. 2A, 2B, 3, 4. Who cares?
Yeah.
You wrote it.
Because when you break it down, let's say we remove all the act changes, right? It's still a beginning and an end. And that's really what a story is. It begins and it ends. And I feel like that's me channeling Richard Walter, who's another professor that we had. I don't know if I've told this story on the pod, but I remember like the first class we had with him, and he writes out a slug line and an action block and some dialogue. And then he goes like, this is how a screenplay is normally formatted, because you don't really need day and night because that's a production thing, so he just crosses that out.
Right.
And then he goes, you don't really need interior and exterior because that's evident in the slug line and or the action block, so he crosses that out. And he goes, and sometimes you don't need the slug line, he just crosses that out too. And so he was being a little like facetious, I think. But,
sure.
But I feel like that moment to me said, I don't have to be precious with format. I can kind of be a little free and loose with it.
Sure.
I still have to follow certain rules. Like sometimes I'll still write interior, exterior. Sometimes I'll just be like kitchen.
Okay.
Because you don't need interior, exterior. There's no exterior kitchen, And usually if I just write a singular word for a slug line, it's a continuation of the previous scene.
Yeah.
So it flows where like I'll do a full slug line, interior, exterior, location, day, night. And then the next thing I'm like, bathroom.
Interesting.
And then I'll just write that sequence out. That sequence ends. I'll then start a new slug line that's completely full.
Whatever reads the most seamlessly, whatever doesn't make the reader pause, that is the most important. They have to want to keep their eyes on the page. It's got to flow. They've got to see it in their head. So whether that means interior, exterior, taking it out, it's like the how is the brain gonna take in all this information in the most enjoyable way?
That's something I picked up from Linda Voorhees, that specific way of writing slug lines, because I was writing this screenplay in her class, and she goes, oh, you introduced a slug line here, and I had the same thing copied because I was like going outside of her room, and I said, interior hallway, and she goes, you don't need that, just say outside.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay,
totally.
Yeah,
these are it's bendable, it's malleable. Final draft is quite severe, but you can play with it so it suits your needs and suits the story to its optimal expression.
No one reading your screenplay is going to get to a slug line and says, oh, they didn't put interior, exterior, trash, and stop reading it. They're going to be like, cool, outside or kitchen, and they're just going to keep going.
And to tangent a little bit, I will say, none of the structure, none of the plot matters if you don't have characters you care about. Stacking a script with plot because you feel some sort of need to get all these scenes out that you think are necessary I don't give a shit if I don't know who the characters are, if there's no empathy, if there's no hook, why? I don't give a shit about cool shit happening if I don't care about the characters.
I have an interesting story that I think you'll appreciate. I owe my career to you.
Stop.
No. This is. I'm gonna like go back through the thread. So I graduated from grad school with a script that did really well, and got me rep, and it got optioned, and I got all my generals from it.
Yeah.
And I still do on occasion. And I remember writing that script, and I had this whole story planned out, and it was about a superhero, and who didn't want to save people. And I pitched it to you, and I was like, Julia, I need notes, I need help. And you were like, the story isn't about the superhero, it's about this mom who was like a supporting character.
Oh.
And I was like, God, you're so right. and it was true, because I wrote all this plot. Yeah. And I didn't write any of the characters except for this one mom who was who felt betrayed. Or maybe I didn't even write her. I forget how that character came to be, but that was the most interesting character of the script.
Yeah.
Right? And you were like, it's about her. And then I was like, and the script just fell out of my head, over the next couple of weeks. And then that became the thing that started my career.
Oh. Well, it was already in you.
Come on.
You just had to tweak it a little bit.
Take the compliment. Say thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. But that goes to kind of, what you said. It's important to have good characters that are interesting.
Look, I'm going to quote every millennial's favorite show, or not favorite show, but every millennial's touch point for good screenwriting television, Breaking Bad. A lot of cool shit happens in Breaking Bad. Yeah. The reason we care is because the pilot spends so much time with Walter White establishing who he is, what his needs are, where he's fallen short. It creates empathy. And I do not think a successful script exists without it, no matter what format.
Yeah.
Show me. Truly.
Yeah.
Even Under the Skin, where Scarlett Johansson plays that scary alien who sucks men out of their bodies. She is objectified. She is a stranger in a strange land. She does terrible things in that script. And yet you still feel a sense of you don't want her to harm to come to her.
Yeah. What is your favorite screenplay?
God, that's a horrible question.
Well, sorry. Your favorite screenplay to look at structure and be like, wow, that is so well written.
Capote.
Okay, interesting. You're going to laugh at mine.
What is it?
Modern Family.
But we're talking about different formats.
Doesn't matter. That first page, masterclass.
Huh.
Because it introduces 5 characters. It's funny.
Yeah.
Maybe not 5 characters, because the mom, the dad, and the 2 daughters, I think. So 4 characters. And it's just one page. And there's 2 or 3 slapstick jokes. And everybody's distinct.
Sure.
And it's all in one page. It's so tight.
Yeah. I think the acid test is you got to cover the names on a script. And if you can tell the characters apart by how they speak, then you've succeeded. I say Capote because the script, the character arc is a 180. He starts off by saying he doesn't lie. He's a journalist. He doesn't lie. And by the end of the movie, he has not done everything he could have to save Perry from being hung because he needs to finish his book. So he looks at him in the face and lies to him and said, I did everything I could, through tears. And we know he's lying, and he knows he's lying. Perry knows he's lying. He's gone on a total journey. And I just thought that's such a beautiful craft master class, how Dan Futterman was able to show us the journey of this character. Capote is a brilliant fucking film. People should watch it. I mean, it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, for crying out loud.
There's a lot of Capote shows now in films.
Yeah, but that one,
yeah.
that one if you want to see complex character relationships, you want to see unsympathetic narrator or protagonist, but he is, he's essentially using these people in jail, Perry and, oh my God, Richard Dick Hickok, to further his career. So there's part of him that is pretty reprehensible, but then there's the part of him that's very broken and damaged. And it's in that tension. That's the other thing. Every scene's got to have tension. Mm-hmm.
Conflict. Well, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like every scene is just a microcosm of the macro, which is the screenplay. The screenplay has a beginning, middle, and end, and this rising action and this conflict, and every scene should be the same.
What?
That it has a beginning and it has an end, right?
Yeah.
It has a rising action, it has conflict.
Yeah. On a very small level. Yeah. Someone's pouring milk into a glass, the glass spills with milk, and then they got to find a place to clean it up. Like, that's small. It's tension. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, yeah. Also, another Richard Walter saying was, no one wants to go watch a movie about the village of the happy people.
Yeah.
No one cares.
No. Two things you said. It was kind of conflict in a scene and no one cares. I remember people were like, not people, but the professors we had talking about, a moment from your life that's so cool, and like, you have to write about it. And they're like, nobody cares.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That moment that you think is so special, everybody's had that moment.
Okay. But I will say, your goal is to make people care.
Exactly. It's not that story isn't good, because it could be
good
universal.
Is subjective.
Yeah,
it's about taking what means something to you and making it relatable, making it universal.
Yeah.
This is where theme comes in. What I'm saying is, your job is to make people care what happened to you. And it's not because you are so cool. It's because other people will be able to relate to what happened to you, because we are all not so different. And this is where theme and universality comes in. So that's the fun. The fun is, going back to biopics, how do I make people care about John Singer Sargent, Peter O'Toole, Gustav Eiffel? How do they go into this experience with the preconceived notion of, I have nothing in common with this person? And my goal is for them to leave feeling like, I understand how they felt. I could see myself. What would I do in that position? That's the joy to me.
I like that.
Yeah.
You were talking about cutting things out of your screenplay, and it kind of made me think about this other moment that I had with Linda in class. And I had a scene, and then the scene had a couple of really cool lines.
Yeah.
At the very end, and she's reading it, and because in class we would bring in 10 pages, we would each have those pages read out loud.
Yeah.
And then we would get notes. But first she would be like, what did you hear? Which I think was really cool. Anyways, that's not the whole thing that I'm talking about. She read that one, like the last page of that scene, and the last couple lines she just goes, you don't need that.
Oh,
the scene ends here. And she was right.
Yeah.
And then now my approach to, like, I'll write a scene out, but then later on when I'm editing, but it's all part of the process of writing, I'll go back to it, and I, like, out of the blue, I'll just start removing lines of dialogue, like stuff that contains information.
When your ego starts getting in the way of what best serves the story, that's when you've got to start getting the red pen out, because you can't supersede what is actually necessary. And it's like when you think you're too good for for the editing process or whatever, everything you've written is sacrosanct, and how could you possibly think of cutting this line? That's your probably biggest red flag, to be like, wow, all right, the story comes first, my ego comes second. If that means I got to cut this scene that I really loved, then so be it.
But I've noticed that even if I cut chunks that are like information, I'll cut it, and then as I read it, it's still evident that the information's there, but it's all subtext.
Well, that's the other big thing, subtext.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest gripe I have when I read screenplays is that a lot of writers just write exactly what their characters are thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to imagine it on a screen, and no character would ever say, well, I wish you would come home for Thanksgiving because, you're never home, and that really upsets me. And,
yeah,
it's
because how that conversation would go is, okay.
Well, how that conversation is, someone wants to say, I wish you would come home for Thanksgiving because you're never home and your job's too important. Mm-hmm. The subtext would be something like, guess you won't, I can't think of it off the top of my head. Cut that, editor, please, because I want to sound good.
We're keeping it.
No.
We're keeping it. But no, you're onto something, because you have this chunk of, we're going to write a screenplay right now. So this chunk of information that's the subtext. Like, I have these thoughts and feelings that create conflict, right? But then how would that be audible?
All right. Here's the subtext. Oh, the line is, oh, I wish you would come home for Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. The subtext is, Aunt Helen's coming. What does that mean? Oh, I wish you would see Aunt Helen.
Yeah, you haven't seen her in a while. Yeah,
because you're not coming for fucking Thanksgiving.
The conversation about seeing the aunt that you haven't seen in a while, and under that is, I wish you would come home because
There we go.
Yeah, that's interesting.
See,
you're welcome, everybody. Go write that. Go write a Thanksgiving script about.
Write a whole scene where everyone says exactly what they feel. Mm-hmm. Go back and then write it about passing mustard across a table.
Wonderful.
And then see the tension underneath. Like, it's not about the mustard. It's not about
the mustard.
It's not about anything that is actually happening. That is subtext.
Speaking of conflict, Phoebe Waller-Bridge has a really interesting way of writing tension into a scene. So she'll have the scene be about this thing, but then give the character like two other things. Like, oh, then she has to like comb her hair, or like she can't find her keys.
Yeah.
Right? So there's like layers upon layers of just this like annoyance that elevate the conflict as she's having a conversation with her mom about like, her not dating anybody or something. I don't know. So those layers add up, and I think that's really interesting. And I try to add that into my scripts.
Well, that's like weaving an A story, B story, C story. Mm-hmm. The A story is the plot, what's actually happening. The B story is what's going on between the characters, and the C story is the extenuating circumstances or something going on in that scene at that particular time.
I hope everybody listening got something out of this last half hour of us
digressing about craft and screenwriting. And if you were to sum up what we just said, what's the most important thing? Outline. Get some note cards.
Yeah.
Don't write what characters are actually saying.
Don't write for ego.
Get rid of your ego.
Yeah. It's a lot of stuff. There's something there for somebody.
I hope so.
No, there is. There is something there for me, and then there's something there for you. And I feel like between us, somebody's gonna, find something educational from this episode. And it's our first craft episode. I don't think I've ever had a craft episode.
Hooray!
Yeah. Thank you for being here for my first craft episode.
You're so welcome.
We have, we've been talking a lot about the ups, and I think there's a conversation to be had about the downs. The downs. But we'll talk about that on the next episode, the final episode, next week.
Thank you.
Julia, thank you for coming on the pod. Thank you for everybody listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us at the CFA studio for another series of the Anywood Podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you find your podcasts or on YouTube at the Cinematography for Actors YouTube channel. See you next week.
From the CFA Network, Cinematography for Actors is bridging the gap through education and community building. Find out about us and listen to our other podcast at cinematographyforactors.com.
Cinematography for Actors Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit. For more information on fiscal sponsorship, donations, because we're tax exempt now, so it's a tax write-off, and upcoming education, you can email us at contact@cinematographyforactors.com. Thanks.